Hi, this is Nick with Cincinnati Bass Pro Shops. Today I'm going to be talking to you about different types of fishing line. Um, cabin fever's coming pretty strong here. I've seen a lot of guys coming in, looking around. I'm the same way. I'm around it all day long. It's time to get the fishing gear ready, and I'm sure a lot of y'all are going to be line shopping here soon, spooling up the reels, that type of thing. There's basically three types of line we have over here. The first one, and this is kind of like an all-around, this is just a regular monofilament line. If you're just getting into fishing, this is probably going to be your best bet. This handles extremely well on pretty much every style of reel out there. It's a very limp line. You're not going to really have many problems with a kink in, stuff like that. Monofilament, it's going to come in three different colors. We have green, we have a clear blue, like if you want to be able to see the line a little bit better. The sunlight, when it actually hits it, or even a black light for that matter, it's going to basically make it extremely bright, extremely easy to see, very visible. The clear blue fluorescence is very popular for night fishing, obviously, just because you can see it a lot better under a black light. If you're just getting into it, you got kids and stuff like that, 6 pound test is pretty much what you need to go with. And it's not going to necessarily mean you're going to catch like a 6 pound fish. I mean, you can. It just kind of depends on how well you're going to play the fish. But your pound test on every single box over there is going to basically tell you the breaking strength of that line. So if it says 6 pound test, it's going to say, that's going to be basically 6 pounds of pressure to break that line. You pulling against the fish, and if there's a maximum load of 6 pounds or higher on there, the chances of that line are, very, very likely it's going to break. But monofilament, it has certain properties that I like, just bass fishing a lot, things like that. It does have more buoyancy than a lot of these other lines, except for braid. But I throw that on a lot of my moving baits, top waters especially. It does have a little bit more stretch than your fluorocarbon. So over a long distance cast, if you do set the hook, you just got to kind of watch that. Just pretty much crack them pretty good, and you'll be able to get the hooks through. Crankbaits, anything with treble hooks, typically I'm throwing, a monofilament. I know a lot of guys are starting to go through like fluorocarbons and stuff like that, but I typically like a monofilament. I just feel it handles a lot better. For me anyway. I mean, everybody's going to have a different opinion on that, but I do like our monofilament just for that reason. And then you have your fluorocarbon, which is, this is pretty awesome stuff. This is new for us this year, and it's actually very, very similar to another line company over there. If you do hold them side by side, I mean, they're pretty much not hiding that. They're pretty much making that for us. Fluorocarbon, you want to use that for most of your drop baits, stuff that you want to have a lot of feel with. If you're jigs, tubes, worms, any type of creature bait, anything you're going to have to stay in contact with the bottom to get that feel, to be able to feel that light bite when that fish is just barely going to pick that bait up. Fluorocarbon does play a very significant role in that. The main thing I like about it is it has very, very little stretch. So when you do set the hook on a fish, you can drive that hook home, fairly quickly, and get that fish turned and get them away from some cover. And when you're using fluorocarbon, the way that they're making it nowadays, like guys are, when I talk to them, they're pretty shy about using it on a spinning reel, and you can use 6 and 8 pound test, and it's extremely strong when you get down to that pound range. 6 pound test, 8 pound test on a spinning reel should handle fairly well. If you are still having a little bit of an issue with it, you can always just take, and this is something new we just brought out too, this line conditioner. You can spray that on the spool, and it actually will, that line will actually handle a lot better. And it actually saves you in the long run as far as money goes. That stuff, if you hit your reel before you go out fishing, that day, or when you get to the lake and you're just pulling up to a spot, you hit it a couple times, that stuff, it's basically going to be like you just put a fresh spool of line on there. That stuff acts really quick, it reacts to the line, and It's going to allow you to just basically not have to spend hundreds and hundreds of dollars a line. And on my fluorocarbon, on that note, you know, I don't tie directly to the spool. I'll take some cheap monofilament, fill half my spools up with some, just cheap mono, tie off to the braid or tie off to the fluoro for that matter, and just spool it on there because most of the time you're not using a whole lot of line if you're just pitching bait, stuff like that. Even if I'm casting, if I do need to rely on fluorocarbon for if I go up to Lake St. Clair or something like that where that water is extremely clear and I'm making an extremely long cast and I set the hook on a fish, that lower stretch line is going to allow me to drive the hook home a little bit better. But 60, 50 yards, you don't need much more than that. I mean, you're not going to I don't try to put myself in a situation where I have to make an extremely long cast when I'm bass fishing or fishing in general. I try to get as close as I can to the fish without spooking them and then making a presentation to them. And by doing that, I'm not going to be using a whole lot of line, so there's really no reason to tie directly to the spool and try to make an extremely long cast. You're hurting yourself in the long run, and you couldn't potentially lose a lot of fish even though you do have a lower stretch line. You can also use this stuff for like if you're jerkbait fishing in the springtime. That does help a little bit better. Getting the bait down to where it needs to be, things like that. If you're throwing crankbaits, you need to get a bait down a little bit further. Fluorocarbon does help too. The properties of this line actually allow it to sink a little bit better. It's denser, excuse me, than your typical monofilament, and that's what allows that bait to get down a little bit quicker. Then your other line you have here is you have your braid. Braid, to me, like I said, Cincinnati Bass Pro Shops, to me, we don't have what the guys in Florida have, big mats and stuff like that. But we do throw a lot of like frogs, like the hollow belly frogs, the soft toads and stuff like that up here, where if we do have grass and things like that, that braid does come into play a lot, in my opinion. My frog rod, I spool it up, excuse me, I spool it up with braid, pretty much, same thing too. I'll back it, and then I'll put the braid on top. I'll back it with the monofilament, and put the braid on top, and then I'm good to go. The braid actually does float quite a bit, and it does allow that frog, when you're trying to get the walking action of the bait, it does allow you to be able to make it walk a little bit better, almost in the same spot. And that's where a lot of my strikes come from. If I can get that frog to walk almost in the same spot and not move as far and have a lot of action going on there, it's going to look more like a wounded bluegill or something like that. That's kind of what they think it is anyway. In most cases, if that frog's moving all on the surface like that, creating a commotion, a lot of those bigger bass will come up and suck it down. And if you look at a lot of the frogs, they're coming up and they're eating it like that, you got to drive those two big nasty hooks through that fish. So you got those two hooks sticking off the back. That braid, you can just hit them as hard as you want and they're going to go through. I mean, if you're especially at close range, you'll be able to drive those hooks through no problem. Then the other thing too that you want to do especially on braid as far as knots goes, just to give you a little rundown on that, never ever tie a clinch knot or a cinch knot or on braid. That thing will come out right now. Always tie a Palomar. You can hit it with a little bit of fishing glue if you don't feel comfortable just leaving the knot as is. Also too, there's another way you can tie a Palomar knot on. Most of my baits that I tie on are Palomar knots, for that matter. And a lot of guys say, you got to wet your line, things like that. This is something kind of neat. Is if you take this is just a regular bass jig, but if you just take it, and I've been tying my Palomar knots like this for years. Just get your regular Palomar knot going. Just like this, loop through. But I don't finish the knot. I always have that like that. And then this is allowing me to tie a Palomar knot without even having to wet the line. There's no friction whatsoever, even when pulling down, because the knot's not completely done. There's no friction whatsoever on that, and then all you do is just cut your tag end, you're ready to go. And the way why guys are saying you have to wet your line is that line will actually harden, crystallize a little bit because of all the friction and weaken. And even if you're using like a 14 or 20 pound fluorocarbon, you could break off on the first hook set, even on just a 12 or 13 inch fish. So that's definitely a key player as far as just, you know, your knots and stuff like that goes. But, you know, as far as the lines, that's pretty much it. If you have, you know, see anybody back in the fishing department at all, we're all back there more than willing to help you out if you're confused about the line selections that we do have on the wall, because there's quite a bit out there.